Welcome back to another episode of DEI-LOGS, a Career Prism podcast where we discuss all things diversity and inclusion with D&I champions across sectors and industries. So today we have with us Ms. Rasha Kutty, founder and Chief Facilitator of Empathy Matters Private Limited. Rasha has a master's degree in business as well as a master's degree in psychology. She's a certified instructional designer. She's a certified empathic intervision facilitator as well as certified empathy circles facilitator. She has worked with clients like Google, Yahoo, and Target. And today she is here with us to discuss about the importance of empathy in driving conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Welcome to DEI-LOGS, Rasha.
Thank you so much.
It's great to have you here. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of DEI-LOGS.
Of course, it's a pleasure.
So how was your journey? You're coming here from Cochin.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I just got here a few hours ago.
Yeah.
So it was a bit rushed, but yeah, I'm feeling
Hope it
great.
was not too much of a trouble.
Not at all. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so I was wondering, you have 2 master's degrees. You could have easily had a very good corporate career, which I think you have had also. But then you started your own venture. So what inspired you for this transition from a corporate career to founding the Empathy University?
All right. That's a very good question to begin with. And it's a question I get asked a lot, right? And I always used to wonder, like, why did I myself was always confused as to why and to be very, very honest, I don't know. Like, that would be the most honest response I can give you. I think it's a combination of several factors, possibly. I remember being very tired of the job that I was doing.
Like a lot of us are, but
the core work that I was doing. But I loved the company I last worked with. I mean, I worked at Yahoo before I quit the job, and I loved the place. I loved the people. I loved the amazing managers I had there, and everything was great, right? But the core work that I was doing, for some reason, I wasn't satisfied, right? And that is one aspect of it. I think there are a lot of other factors as well that contributed ultimately to this decision to quit a comfortable job and start something on my own. And one of those things could be my own personal experiences while I grew up. I come from a village, in a district called Malappuram in Kerala. And, and we have a very conservative culture there. So for me, I guess my experiences in general have not been, I grew up in the midst of a lot of judgment. And so I
can relate to that.
Yeah.
I come from such a small town myself.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so there were several experiences, I could say, in the education sector, like the corporate companies especially the company where I first worked, where, you come across situations where you wish people had more empathy, right? And I don't know why I got stuck to the word empathy. I remember, like, I first really thought about it because we all go through the education system. We would have heard the word here and there, but it never really struck me. But at some point, it was during, I was reading this book called To Kill a Mockingbird, right? And I remember that is where, like, that concept really struck me, right? Like,
That's a great book, actually.
Yeah, it's a great book. And I remember just thinking about, empathy and just reflecting on it for the first time, like, around that time. And since then, I think it just stuck with me. But I never really had any plans of doing something around it
as a work.
So I think ultimately at the end of it, what happened is, so I'm also a person of faith. So I would say I also like to think of this as, maybe divine in some sense where, you know how it is, right? Like a lot of things just come together and then you end up doing something. Yeah, exactly. So now when I look back, a lot of dots get connected, but to be honest, nothing was planned. Nothing was, in fact, I still remember the exact day when it happened. Like, I remember for 2-3 days, I was just playing around with the Empathy University name. I just felt that it's so core and it's so important, right? And I remember one day just coming to the office and sitting at my desk and getting, like, switching everything on to get started with work. And my heart was just, there was so much dissatisfaction and just I was feeling so low, right? And then without consulting with anyone, like without asking anybody, talking to
Just took a
anybody.
decision.
I just got up like from my seat. My manager was on leave, I think, that day. So I went to my manager's manager, and then I told her, like, I'm not happy here. Like, I have to quit. And such a wonderful person, like what she told me is, Rasha, like, did we are we not supporting you enough? I was like, it has nothing to do with you. It's just me. And so she asked me, like, do you have an idea?
Plans.
So I do have an idea. So she's like, do one thing, like, take 2 months, like, do the bare minimum that you have to do here, but like take time to just like form, like give it form. And then why don't you quit? That makes a lot more sense. And I still to this day am touched by the, by what she said. I mean, usually managers are very terrified of like losing employees, like, attrition is a huge problem. But here was a manager who I think had empathy, exactly. And look at where I got, like, because of, like her empathic sort of,
I mean, that's what drives, I guess, eventually all kind of changes, right?
Absolutely.
If you're able to empathize with other person.
Exactly.
So what would you say is, as per you, what is true empathy?
As we grow up, we collect a lot of different experiences, a lot of different, conditioning and whatnot as we grow up, right? Biases, we learn all these sort of things as we grow up. And then, and all of these things just form a lens around our eyes, right? Or in front of our eyes. And it's through this lens that we look at the world. So they say, like, the mind is like a projector. And you don't see the world as it is. You usually see the world as who you are, right? So empathy for me, in its truest sense, is being able to look at somebody else's world through their lens without, or like after removing your own lens. Or empathy is often described, or like if I go to a workshop and if I'm doing a workshop, most people, if I ask them what's empathy, what they say is like stepping into the shoes of somebody else. Yes. And that's correct. But I think an even more accurate way of practicing empathy is first stepping out of your own shoes first, and then stepping into somebody else's shoes. And I would say that is, in a truer sense, empathy. And also one thing that would make empathy a lot more accurate again is also learning self-other differentiation, or learning that self-other differentiation is a part of empathy, where a lot of the times what happens is when you empathize with someone and you don't have boundaries there, you literally like, emotional contagion is what results. Like you literally feel a little too deeply like what the other person is feeling. And I don't think that's really constructive. So always stepping into somebody else's world, but with the realization that their world is theirs and my world is separate and distinct from it. So I think that aspect, that self-other differentiation, is also critical for the accurate practice of empathy.
That's like explained it to the best anyone could have.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So what do you think, like what role can empathy play in driving diversity, equity and inclusion in organizations in general?
I think empathy is the answer, like to the, to whatever it is that organizations are trying to achieve through DEI initiatives, right? It's the answer. I think it's at the foundation. And I think when you say DEI initiatives, one of the major aspect, or like I think I see it as a culture change, right? Like through DEI initiatives, that's what organizations are trying to achieve, like a culture change and building a culture which is more inclusive, where people feel like they belong, right? And where you have diverse people like coming together, right? And you cannot have that without empathy. So I always say this: if instead of like just doing DEI initiatives for the sake of it or for ticking a box, if you put your efforts into building an empathic culture, then the natural, organic consequence of building an empathic culture is diversity, equity, and inclusion, right?
So basically, what you're saying is that if the intent is empathy, like the first basic step is empathy itself, you follow that path and the diversity, equity, inclusion, all of that comes around.
Naturally, right? Of course. I mean, in an empathic workforce, obviously everybody respects each other's diversity. And so it's just only natural that diverse work, people just come in to the culture. And so and so I also think that a natural consequence of building of having diversity, equity, and inclusion in a company is also belonging, right? So it just,
Basically, once you have empathy, unconscious biases, conscious biases, like all of that, like totally gets out of the picture.
Yeah.
great.
Or at least you're able to manage these biases in a better way. Yeah.
But see, one of the things that is very important in corporate in general is we hear that term a lot going around, productivity.
Absolutely.
So how do we strike a balance between the need for empathy as well as the demands of productivity and performance at workplace?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I get confused when, when, like, for example, I think there's an inherent belief or like, a thought in a lot of organizations or like especially leadership teams that empathy and productivity they don't go hand in hand, which maybe it's me because I've maybe it's all these years of work in this domain and like I'm just like maybe a level of expertise that I've gained in this field. It's impossible for me like to have to see that people have that question, because see, at the end of it, all of us are human beings, right? And we come to work carrying our emotions, carrying our our humanity with us, like on a day-to-day basis. And empathy is at the root of human connection, right? It is what, like, two people, like they cannot connect, they cannot work together without empathy being, a force of power between them or a force of connection between them. And so like you want a happy team, you want people who work well together, you want a culture where people feel like they've, they belong. Like again, like at the end of the day, what every human being needs, I think at its root, is to be loved, is to be cared, is to be heard and seen, right? I mean, that's what all of us live for, right? And so, and empathy has an answer to all of that. And so, and it's only when people feel seen and heard and understood that they are going to work at their best capacity. Like you can't expect
it's directly related. Basically.
Exactly. I mean, if you do not have, if you're not well, or if you don't feel like, people care about you or they see you, you won't even enjoy coming to work on a day-to-day basis. So at the end of the day, you want a productive workforce. Empathy is one of the most crucial skills, and there have been a lot of studies, to be honest, done around this. And just an example is, there is, I think it was 2 separate surveys done by Ernst & Young and Catalyst, and in both of them, what they did is they surveyed American workforce, like across different industries and whatnot, just to check, like, so, and they asked people who work under managers, like, so they would ask them to rate their managers on, empathy. And wherever managers ranked high on empathy, productivity was great. Like as high as 81% above, like the, and productivity, engagement, work-life balance, creativity. I mean, we always forget that creativity and innovation is core to
productivity.
Productivity, and as well as like just coming up with better product development, everything, right? For an organization, like for if for them to build a unique proposition, like they do need innovation and creativity, and it's one of the 21st century skills at the end of the day. And empathy is again at the core of building an innovative culture, because again, see, for me to really understand your perspective, to empathize with you, one of the biggest qualities that I need to develop is that of openness and curiosity. Like earlier we said, right, I need to step out of my shoes and then step into your shoes. But when I step into your shoes, if I do that just for the sake of it, it's not going to really result in anything. But if I do it with this very open, like curious sort of a mindset, where I'm like, oh, I really want to know, like, maybe your perspective is just opposite to mine. Right? But despite that, I'm like, okay, let me just, try to just like sit with that for a bit, right? Very few people have that openness and curiosity, but this openness and curiosity is also the birthplace of creativity and innovation, right? So all of that is connected. So you want a creative, productive workforce,
and it's easier
is the answer.
I think resolve conflicts as well when
Absolutely.
People have that openness to discuss and to be able to see the other person's perspective, even if you are like completely polar opposite views. But if you are ready to see the other person's perspective from where they are coming from, then like it's a great thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think empathy is the next step. I would say, like in the sense, to empathize, obviously you need to listen,
Of
right?
course.
You need to understand the other person. And I always say this, there are different levels to even listening. Like, for example, like you're saying something to me now, I can listen and just like, like it just goes out of my other ear. Like I can listen enough so that it's just there in my short-term memory, and if I can reflect it back to you. But there is this higher level of listening where I let what you say move me, change me, right? And I'm not saying that I need to let go of my identity and like everything no, that's not what I mean.
There is enough space for everyone's perspective.
Exactly,
right?
where I
It's
just
not
like I'm at least open and curious about, oh, this person just said something that I don't usually believe in, like so why not just like tread on that for a bit, and okay, then I can maybe decide whether to accept that perspective or not. But that
Give it a fair shot at least.
Exactly, yeah.
So you work with a lot of organizations, and you do this empathy facilitating trainings. Can you share any insights or best practices for creating psychologically safe spaces at organizations?
Of course, like I think one of the reasons why empathy is such a beautiful skill to master is also because it's not just about building an empathic culture, but at an individual level, I think empathy or practicing empathy is also something that can bring psychological well-being, right? So in that sense, like creating psychologically good spaces. I mean, I can give you a wonderful example. Like this is a real case study that I very often talk about in courses. So there was this organization in the US which during the 2009 recession, right? So they had around 7,000 employees at that point in time, and they needed to save around $10 million, right? Around that time, right? And what would any other organization do? Like, and they needed to save it like $10 million from their, like labor costs, in labor costs at the end of the day. So any organization would have laid off their people off, right? But the CEO of the company, he was so reluctant to do that. And it was, I think what made the entire thing beautiful was also the way he communicated it to his employees, right? So what he decided to do is, he said that instead of any of us having to instead of some of us having to go through a lot of pain, let each and every one of us go through a little bit of pain. And so what he did is something so clever. Like what he did is he enforced a policy where every single employee in the company had to mandatorily take 4 weeks of unpaid leave, right? To save, that cost. And believe it or not, there was so much of morale and the way he kind of communicated this whole message to the employees as well, right? And it just boosted employees.
It reflects that, that your employer cares
about you. And because of that, at the end of the whole thing, I mean, people who needed the money, needed more money, they were taking less leave, and they, and other people were taking their leaves for them. Like, they were undergoing like unpaid, they were going on unpaid leaves for the sake of their friends, and there was all the support among employees, and at the end of the day they ended up saving 20 million.
Wow.
Just through this activity. I mean, how many people really do care about their employees to that level, right? So I think there are a lot of things we can do, a lot of things, like right from hiring to even the way you kind of sent out your job descriptions, right? Like how do you write a job description? What language do you use? Is like, what do you say? What is it called? Work-life balance, like being reflected in the way you're framed, and don't frame it just for the sake of it, but like, your organization should also have, be valuing like work-life balance. So just all of these things, coming together when it comes to hiring, like, in an interview, have you created do you have a diverse panel? Like, is it, what do you say? In that interview room, do you create a space that feels respectful for an interviewee, like when he or she walks in? And recently I was at this conference in Goa, and I remember like someone I met there was talking about how, despite being the chief human resources officer there, right, she would go personally, right, to like every time and a team gets onboarded, and she would personally go and talk to them for a short while about the necessity of inclusion and diversity, equity, inclusion and all of that. I mean, how many leaders actually take the effort to do that, right? So there are 100 small things, and this is a part of like the work I do as well. Like we can craft things around your specific sort of work culture and work routines, so that empathy becomes a part of your culture. Yeah.
Okay. So we have already spoken about how we can integrate like empathy in hiring and talent management processes. So how can we like measure the effects of the empathy training? Like, are there any tangible matrices to that?
Absolutely. There are a lot of ways we can do this. Where I struggle is that, like, it's hard, or it's time consuming to actually do a very well-rounded sort of, because see, there are lots of self-report measures, which is what I do. Like, and one thing is, if you're giving a 2-day empathy workshop, you can't expect people to dramatically like kind of change like in 1 or 2 days, or and most companies like they ask me to do workshops around which are half day, 1 hour, 2 hour. I mean, you can't expect, like, the least we can do the most we can do in these sort of workshops is just give some bit of awareness. So you can check for awareness of empathy, but that's the max you can do in such situations. But we also offer like 6-month programs, 8-month programs. And when I say 6 month, 8 month or 12 month, what I mean is once a month you will have like a 1-day session or something like that. But these have continuity, these have repetition, these are all important to learning.
You cannot, it's not a 1-day thing to do.
No, like you really have to. So after each session, you take things and then you like kind of implement these things. Then you come back, right? And it's a whole exactly. So in such cases, we do like again measure. But again, what we usually do is we have a session. What do you say? A questionnaire. We have a post session. We have a lot of standardized questionnaires with very good validity, reliability. Like for example, we have the Toronto Empathy Questionnaire. We have the interpersonal reactivity index, and we have all these tools available in the market. So these are one way of doing it, like self-reported measures. But for some reason, I'm just not comfortable with self-reported measures alone. I rely on my observation skills as well. I mean, like when people on the first day to the 8th month or the 12th
if there have been any changes
and in the way they speak, in the way there is this potential for us to also collect qualitatively, like what they have to say, what the experiences have been. So that's also an option. Right. Other than that, so another good way of doing it would be like probably 360-degree feedback. Like, for example, you have a set of people who have been trained like intensively, like for a 6-month probably course or something like that on empathy. And then what you do is by the end of it, you can do you can do a post. And what you do is you go around and ask, like, their subordinates, like, their team members who report to them.
Noticed any changes.
Yeah, their, so managers, like, so everyone. So that's a very well-rounded way of, I wouldn't say just that, like, it's a combination of a lot of these techniques together when it comes that we have a well-rounded, idea. So I think this is one way of doing it. Like I said, observation is another way of doing it. I also think measuring other factors which are related, or you can do something like this. Like if there is a team which has been very, very intensively like trained on empathy, and there is this other team which hasn't, do a comparison study. Like, if they are relatively like, doing like, if these are both tech teams, then do a comparison study of like, both turnover, like how many people are quitting, like after like, a year after like the empathy, workshops or these intensive program, how many people are quitting? How many people are more satisfied with their work, right? How many people are more productive? Like, we can even measure their productivity and compare it, right? So before, how were they? Like, how did they compare in terms of productivity, engagement, like all these other stuff? Like, but after like after giving
that
workshops or like the program to one of the teams, so the other being a control group, like by the end of it, what was, how different were the results? So there are lots of ways. And I think the key is to, pick up several different things and just like club them together.
It depends upon like the sector that
absolutely
it has to be customized basically.
Absolutely, right? Exactly. So I would say the organization has to be really involved in the whole process, right?
Not like, we have just assigned.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be like, me just
workshop.
coming with, this is how we're going to do it. No, like, and very often this is something I suggest, like, it's during, like, after a couple of sessions with these, with the team, that I myself realize, this is what would work best for them. So which is why I don't always like stick to a very tight sort of a workshop program or anything. It's always customized, because very often as a facilitator, I think that's one of the biggest skills that a facilitator should have. In the middle of a workshop, you suddenly realize that, there are certain people with whom you need to probably use a different strategy, like, so that they benefit the most from like the workshop. So you obviously have to change your style. You have to do a lot of things which you otherwise hadn't planned on. So it should be very organic in a sense, right? So even when it comes to measuring, I think it should be something that, I do in collaboration with, I would say, the organization, the HR team, like, and obviously if we are going to, and then we together have to pick out like what are the best ways of like creating a comprehensive report and together kind of, create one.
So it is customized, but like there would be some general elements to a workshop,
Absolutely.
right? So there has to be one basic structure, I would say.
Yeah.
So
sure.
Can you like walk me through a general workshop?
Sure, of course.
What activities, what kind of
I use a lot of stories. Like, in empathy workshops, like especially, and the beauty of it is because I've done so many workshops over the years, the workshops themselves are places where you hear the most amazing of stories, right?
Yeah.
Because people just share their experiences, and I host a lot of discussions within these, especially the long-term programs are very, very, I change by the end of it a little bit each time, right? And so there will be all these beautiful stories that come up. So stories, I think, are powerful, and not just me talking about stories. It's mostly like,
stories coming from people,
from them. And I think, again, something I think is a strong facilitation skill. Like, I shouldn't be the one who's like teaching or just like putting like a lot of information on people. It should be them themselves, like recognizing and realizing a lot of things on the way. And sometimes those insights come when somebody else is in the group is speaking, right? So that is one. So different things are covered. Like, I really think understanding what empathy truly is, that's very critical. And that was one of the first questions you asked me, and I'm grateful for that.
We're circling back to that.
Yeah, because very often I think what people in general consider empathy to be is projection, right? It's projection, right? And it's not truly empathy. So they are not the same. And so, which is why I think it's very important that we speak about what empathy actually is. So I do a lot of work around that, and just taking people through a couple of activities where they really like, experience empathy, because just talking about it really is not enough. Like, for example, I sometimes show pictures and get people to really empathize with the person, or like really, just step into somebody else's world. And so, and I do it in steps where first they are like, they're just stepping into somebody else's shoes, but later they're also removing their own shoes and then stepping into somebody else's shoes. So, at different levels. And I think one other major part of this is also like prejudice and subconscious biases.
Yes.
Like, tackling that, like you rightly said earlier, right? It's a huge part of empathy work, because I think the biggest, prejudice, I think, is at the root of almost all social evils that we have in our societies today, right? And I think empathy is the antidote to that prejudice, right? And and tackling subconscious biases. And one of the biggest barriers to the practice of empathy is, again, biases.
The subconscious biases.
So, which is why I feel that definitely gets covered a lot. And I do a lot of activities around that as well. And then I also cover something called humanization. One of the reasons why a lot of the things that we see around, like genocides and whatnot, like, happening live on television.
They dehumanize everyone who is different
dehumanize
from them,
people. And so, so humanization, and that is a very important skill to have. So, so we cover humanization. And I also cover like, oh, by the way, the most important thing that I have to mention, like, so every empathy workshop, I also speak specifically about self-empathy, because empathy is just impossible if you don't have self-empathy. And what do I mean by self-empathy, right? So self-empathy is just this ability to create space within yourself so that you're able to hold somebody else's perspective. Because imagine, like, the number of, life is not easy, right? And it's not easy for any of us. All of us go through our own set of personal challenges and whatnot. And there's a lot here. There's a lot that occupy our minds, like, on a day-to-day basis. And so in the midst of all this, how do you still manage, right? To kind of hear
Have
somebody
empathy for
else's
someone.
perspectives, and it's easier when like for example you and I share a perspective. Let's say it's a political or it's a around work, let's say, right? So there is a policy, I agree with it, you agree with it, then it's very easy for us to empathize, right? For me to empathize with you, it's not much of a deal. But if there is a policy that I strongly agree with and you absolutely do not, then it's very difficult for me to empathize with somebody.
There is the challenge, right?
There is the actual challenge, and this is real. Like, it's there on a day-to-day basis across workplaces and whatnot. So in situations where we both do not have like similar perspectives, how do I still learn to create space in my head where I'm able to hold your perspectives? So different perspectives is one scenario. Like other scenario could be like for example, I had a very difficult morning today. Let's say, like, I had a huge, things went wrong at my home, and then I'm coming to my workplace. I'm very, very upset, and my heart is heavy. Like physically, I'm not in a good space. Right? And then I come to work, and imagine like the first thing in the morning, you get one of your employees or someone who reports to you walk in, and they say like, can I please take leave today? Or like, tomorrow or something like that, in the midst of a project with a tight deadline. You're obviously not going to have the space to really think about why or where he's coming from. No, like you just lose
too much on your plate already.
Like, you have too much on your plate. So creating some space within yourself so that you are able to hold somebody else's perspectives is precisely what self-empathy is. And there's a lot around self-empathy, like, emotions, right? Self-awareness, mindfulness, and a lot of these practices and things come together. So I have like, I do programs just around that, like psychological well-being and self-empathy and psychological well-being, which is so critical because I think that is where, empathy starts. I mean, because if, forget empathy, you won't even be able to listen to somebody if you're not in a good space. So self-empathy is covered. Then I also cover like prejudice and authority structures and how authority, especially in leadership workshops. We do a lot of empathic leadership workshops, and it's very clear, like science is very clear. The more money you have, the more power you have, the less empathy and compassion you naturally tend to have. A lot of studies have proved that, right? So how do you kind of fight these sort of very natural human tendencies to continue to have empathy? Like that's so we figure these sort of things out in workshops. And also like we cover adversarial empathy, but it's the highest sort of, level of empathy. And we go to that only after covering a lot of these other stuff. So in a long-term program, it would probably be the last module, the 8th or the 12th or the 6th month, right? And what we look at is how do you practice empathy towards someone who has very deeply hurt you, someone you don't even like, right? How do you still manage to see the perspectives of that person, right? And make peace with it and have the courage to kind of forgive and live a more fulfilling life.
It's easier to hold a grudge, no?
It's much, much easier to hold a grudge, and there are many factors that kind of contribute to it. So it's very deep. Like, so what I've tried to do with the programs I've created is just dive deep into human psychology and, into the psychology of empathy, basically,
So you have been doing this in India for a while.
Yeah.
Do you think, as a, at India Inc., basically, are we ready for these perspectives yet? What has been your experience so far?
Oh my God, it's been very hard initially, but now I'm sensing a lot more openness. And I think two reasons. One is COVID, and one is like just this more acceptance towards like diversity, equity, and inclusion related efforts, and how empathy is so connected to it. I think design thinking to a certain extent has, because the first step in design thinking is empathizing, right?
Yes.
So because of all these several different factors, I think there is a lot more openness nowadays. But when I began, it was very, very difficult. And I remember I specifically started with the education industry in mind. And I remember going to schools, school after school, like just walking into, I started out initially in my own district, like, and then I remember going to Dubai, to several schools in Dubai. Like I remember going to, like coming to Bangalore and like, speaking to a lot of schools here and education, edtech related companies. And
did they ask you how is it going to bring more money?
Exactly. Like, yeah, they did. That's one thing. And they would also like empathy. I mean, it was just very hard for them to get why, empathy of all things, like, that are like, so can you do something around communication? Can you do something around? So I would always tell them, like, this is at the bottom, at the core, like this is the foundation. If you want me to talk about communication to people, we need to first educate them on empathy, and then talking about communication would make it so much more impactful, right? So yeah, it was very hard, and I don't think India as a market was ready for something like this. It was much easier for me to talk to organizations abroad, be it Europe or America. Like I've worked with a couple of clients, over there, and it's very easy. You just speak about empathy and they're happy and they understand it, they get it. It's been kind of like a thing there, but over here it's still quite hard. Yeah.
Okay, that was all the questions.
Wonderful.
And now we'll be moving on to a fun rapid fire round.
Oh wow!
So it's just don't think into it too much.
All
it's just
right.
very general fun questions.
Sure.
So a phone call or a text message? You're a phone call person or a text message?
Phone call.
Phone calls.
Yeah.
Classic literature or contemporary fiction?
Interesting. Once a classical literature or
contemporary fiction?
Classical literature.
Of course, you prefer To Kill a Mockingbird. So, morning jog or evening walk?
Evening walk.
Planned traveling or spontaneous traveling?
Both, I think. I've done both, and yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Depends on situation, I guess.
Depends on the situation and the people. Yeah.
Any fictional character that you think people can learn empathy from?
I think the father, in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot his name. So him,
Even I don't remember. And your favorite diversity-related quote or mantra?
Sadly, I don't think I have one. You asked me about empathy, I can tell you a lot
of course.
them.
Okay, let's switch the question. Best quote you ever read about empathy?
Empathy, definitely, it's the one in To Kill a Mockingbird, where Atticus Finch, is kind of explaining to his daughter about. So she goes to school, comes back and is complaining about a teacher, and so he tells her this: you never really truly understand a person until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. And I think that is the first time, just reading that for the first time is when I was like, whoa, that's powerful. And it just hit me. You know how there are certain things that you see and hear again and again and again, but there is this one time,
yes,
when it just
when you're ready for it, I guess.
And you're ready for it. The divine sort of just prepares you for that moment. So yeah. So maybe because of that quote has always been very close to my heart.
So that concludes our session. Thank you so much for being here, Rasha.
Thank you so
much. It was
a
great discussion with you. We hope you liked this conversation, and if you did, like, share and subscribe to our YouTube channel for many such more episodes.